Put in over 1,000 hours into Foxhole and it's finally time to give it a review. Foxhole is not your typical MMO. You aren't leveling your character or constantly in search for new or better gear. You are a soldier in a one-of-a-kind, top-down, persistent war with thousands of other players that is being played out 24/7. You will learn today that this game is very unique. No other game is quite like it. 3 years ago, I was watching one of my favorite streamers on Twitch. He was having his normal Variety Friday stream where he played games suggested by his community. I started watching him and two other friends roam around this grassland area. At first I thought this was some kind of Company of Heroes co-op game because of the top-down perspective. I almost clicked out of his stream because normally I'm not interested in a game like this. But before I left, I found out that those enemies he was shooting at were real players. This intrigued me to stay and watch a bit more. After watching for a while, I had learned every enemy he faced was a real player and that there were no NPCs on the map trying to kill him. I had also learned that everything he was carrying on him was player-made. This grabbed my attention the most. Once I heard that all items in the game were player-made, I quickly did my own research to learn that in Foxhole there was an entire logistical chain that helped supply this ongoing war. This is what initially hooked me to Foxhole. From what I remember, I joined Foxhole around War 72 or 73. We are now at War 112. I've played in some capacity every single war. Some wars I put in more hours than others depending on how busy I am with my own life. I remember that when I logged on for the first time, I went straight to the front. I spent no time in home region with the tutorial. I had done enough research on YouTube and Twitch to think that I knew the basics. It's kind of crazy that I remember this, but the first front that I spawned on was Lockheed. The game must have been on sale or had some good marketing going on because when I joined, I spawned in and there were about 8 other new players standing by a bunker. There was a higher ranked soldier there waiting for us and gathering us all together to teach us the basics. I felt like I was in some sort of basic boot camp, and I'm glad that I skipped the tutorial to learn this way. He told us about the guns and the ammo and how to get them and how to set our spawn at the bunker base. He then led us down the road to where the frontline battle was taking place. This world felt so alive to me. With us soldiers running down the road and trucks driving past back and forth, I was immediately immersed into the war. My first ever frontline fight was a bridge battle. When I talk to new players nowadays, I normally don't recommend players have their first frontline experience be on bridges, as they can sometimes become very stale and quite boring very quickly. I was lucky that this was not one of those times. We had what seemed like to me hundreds of soldiers pushing this bridge and fighting enemies from all directions. A group of us even tried to climb some rocks to flank the enemies on the bridge. In Foxhole, you mainly use proxy chat to communicate with fellow soldiers. Commands were being shouted constantly on when to push and when to hold position. They weren't mean commands, but commands like you would hear in a movie with soldiers pushing a front. I honestly felt like I was in some kind of Band of Brothers episode. Though we didn't do anything spectacular like take the bridge or push the enemies back to their main base, it is still today one of the best experiences I've had in Foxhole and something I won't forget. As I mentioned before, I originally got into Foxhole because of the logistical aspect. I had always been intrigued with games where you focused on production and trade. Growing up, I had put hundreds of hours into games like Railroad Tycoon or Pharaoh. As I got older, I didn't like the idea of playing games like this because I didn't feel like I was contributing to anything after completing each level. Once I learned that in Foxhole everything was player-made and that you needed players who would gather the materials, refine them, and turn them into guns and vehicles, I knew this would be the logistical game that I've always wanted to play. With every logistical task that I did, I felt like I was contributing to my faction and something bigger than myself. I hadn't felt like this since World of Warcraft during the AQ event where players needed to work together to gather different kinds of materials to open the AQ gates. I did logistics solo for probably my first 200 hours. After that, I found a logistics specific clan called FMAT on the Warden faction. Once I joined them, my logistical skills were honed and more focused than ever. It was great to work towards common goals with other logistical players, and I still felt like I could do my solo logistics goals as well. Now here I am almost 3 years later and close to 1,200 hours of game time. I would say that 1,000 of those hours has been purely doing logistics in Foxhole. Again, gathering the materials, refining them, and crafting them into items and delivering them to the front where they are needed most. The other 200 hours of my game time has been spent fighting on the front, mainly using it as a learning experience on how I can be a better logistics player, so that I can know what soldiers need on the front and when they need it. Though the combat in this game is not really for me, there are a lot of fun things that you can do on the front. You can be a basic infantry soldier, a medic who heals and revives teammates, a tank specialist who commands a tank of other players and pushes the front. You could be part of an artillery operation and constantly rain shells down on your enemies, or you can take to the seas and join other players in naval battles or invasions. Though I don't partake in the combat side of Foxhole very often, it can still be very fun and there are lots of roles to play. It's really hard for me to play other games now. Spending time watching my rank go up or down in games like Teamfight Tactics or League of Legends now seems like a waste of time. I could be spending this time getting vital supplies to the front and helping push our front lines forward. What started out as a relatively bare bones persistent war sandbox game has turned into a game with so much to do in it that you could easily spend hundreds or thousands of hours playing it. Most players I know that love Foxhole right away easily put in 200 to 300 hours during their first war. There's more than enough content to keep you playing for thousands of hours, as every war can bring something new. There's always something new being teched or researched throughout the war that will keep you going. As a logistics player, building and crafting all of these items and vehicles can sometimes feel like a merciless grind, but for certain type of players like myself, I enjoy it. To get to the end of the war without getting burned out, it takes some serious dedication. So I will say that this game is certainly not for everyone. You will experience some setbacks when it comes to losing territory or even losing a war. Although it's still not the most mechanically complex game out there, it's a fantastic experience to fight on the front lines, build a base, or chill while doing logistics in the back line. Don't let its very basic visuals fool you. The game has a ton of depth. Foxhole is a game that can take a little bit of effort to get into and fully understand. After almost 1,200 hours, I still find myself learning something new almost every time I log on. Whenever anybody talks about Foxhole, they're normally thrown off by the top-down style of the game. The game's top-down style was not for me at first, but it eventually won me over, and now I wouldn't want to play the game any other way. When I'm in a war, I care a lot about winning, but I'll be honest, once the war is over, it doesn't matter to me if we won or lost. I normally just start thinking about what I'm going to do next war and what kind of goals I want to set for myself, or if there's something else I want to learn how to do. It's really up to the players to set goals for themselves, and I think that's where a lot of the fun from Foxhole comes from. What makes Foxhole so playable is that you can log on and do anything. It's completely a sandbox type game. There's no end goal besides winning the war for your faction. Pick any role to play and go have fun. No need to grind levels or stats or gear. Just pick out the right equipment and start doing what you want to do. Sometimes when I turn on Foxhole, I'm not looking for any intense action or in-depth strategy, and I just want to chill and veg out while gathering some resources. I put this type of gameplay in the same tier as Farming Simulator or American Truck Simulator, except I'm actually contributing to fueling the great war machine and helping my faction. The community is very welcoming and positive. You may find some bad eggs from time to time, but Foxhole has always had more positive and helpful players than negative ones. That's the impression I've always gotten from Foxhole, at least. The small dev team based out of Canada has been giving the game constant and substantial updates for years now, and it's all been free this entire time besides playing for the initial game. I've actually wanted them to add some kind of DLC just so I could give them more money for this amazing game. I know I've only talked about my positive experience during this video, but like any other game, it has its issues. I've made videos talking about the issues in Foxhole, and I hope the devs address them in future updates. To summarize some of the issues, players generally don't like the queue system that is in place. Players also don't like the balance for some of the guns or tanks, and the server can be quite laggy at times, so there's still room for improvement. But overall, I would say even with these issues, I still enjoy my experience in Foxhole and still can't wait to log on almost every day to see how I can help win the war. As you heard from my own player experience, Foxhole can sometimes be just as much about the stories that you can tell as it is about the gameplay. Logistics is what pulled me in to play Foxhole, but the community is what made me want to stay. It may come off as very biased because I'm primarily a Foxhole content creator, but if what I talked about intrigued you at all, I would highly recommend that you give this game a try. For those of you that played Foxhole, do you remember your first experience in game? If so, I would love to hear about it in the comments section. Also, how many hours have you logged in Foxhole? I know a lot of Foxhole players out there would call me a filthy casual for only having 1,200 hours, but I got a wife and 2 kids to take care of and a 3rd kid on the way. If I would have played Foxhole in my early 20s, I would have easily put in way more hours into this game. If you are still on the fence about Foxhole, feel free to ask me any questions about the game as well. Thank you all so much for watching and for your support. Make sure to subscribe for more Foxhole content. Thank you Siege Camp and the Foxhole community for this amazing game. Cheers.